Well, Pastor Dalrock writes another really good article about death by chivalry. That chivalry literally can kill you and even kill those around you if you're not careful. Now, he starts off saying that there's this idea of women and children first. Women and children first, we all know women and children first, they got to go first. And if they don't, this is a moral evil of women and children not going first. Now, that idea does not come from Scripture. So I would reject that because women and children first, there's nowhere in Scripture where it says women and children first. But it is a practical philosophy which comes from courtly love, romantic love. Courtly love, of course, is founded on this starry-eyed idealism that men suffering for women is the ultimate masculine virtue. If you suffer on behalf of a woman, that is the ultimate masculine thing that you can do. And also, courtly love has the idea that the more unnecessary the man's suffering, the greater the masculine virtue it holds. And that's in medieval literature. I think we've gone over some of that before. But we can see this even on the Titanic. We learned on the Titanic from history that women and children first is a terrible way to approach saving lives on a sinking ship. It's even a terrible way to save the lives of women and children on a sinking ship, if history tells us anything. The reason is that the women understandably don't want to separate from their men in times of extreme danger, and their men are their protectors, yet Women and Children First demands that women enter into the terrifying unknown of a life raft without their man. As a result, women tend to refuse to enter lifeboats under Women and Children First. On the Titanic, we saw from history that women were too afraid to enter the lifeboats without their men, and as a result, not just men, but women and children needlessly died. Here's a quote from history. All 14 lifeboats, the 2 emergency boats and 2 of the Egenhart boats were launched. These had a capacity of 1,084 passengers. Obviously, many boats were not loaded to full capacity. There were many reasons for this. At first, many women and children were simply unwilling to be lowered 65 feet from the boat deck to the water. Some of the men in the boats were put there simply to show that it was safe on the Titanic and get rid of the fears of the women and children, the passengers. There was enough lifeboat capacity for all the women and children on the Titanic, 534 persons, and 550 men as well. This explains why, especially as the situation became more urgent, more men were put in the boats. Indeed, if all boat crews had loaded 1 man for each woman or child, they could have expected to save all the women and children, plus many more men than what were actually saved. Here's an account from the last lifeboat that was launched on the Titanic. Collapsible Lifeboat D was the 9th and last boat to be lowered from portside. Second Officer Light-Toller had managed to fit the collapsible boat into the now empty davits of Boat 1. He tried to find women to fill it with, but had trouble in finding any. Finally, he said he managed to fill the boat with 15 to 20 people. And then there was a woman on board who gave an account. Mrs. Hoyt gave a conscious account of the tragedy to her father. She did not leave her husband's side until the last boat was being lowered, and then she was torn from him and thrown into a boat. Another woman on board the Titanic wasn't so lucky. On the night of the sinking, Isidore and Ida Strauss were seen standing near lifeboat number 8 in the company of Mrs. Strauss's maid, Ellen Bird. Although the officer in charge of the lifeboat was willing to allow the elderly couple to board the lifeboat with Mrs. Bird, Isidore Strauss, he's a man, refused to go while there were women and children still remaining on the ship. He urged his wife to board, but she refused, saying, "We have lived together for many years. Where you go, I go." Her words were witnessed by those already in lifeboat number 8, as well as many others who were on the boat deck at the time. Isidore and Ida were last seen standing arm in arm on the deck. So both of them, or at least Isa, could have been saved, but because of this idea that her husband shouldn't get on the boat, because of chivalry, so she was going to stay with him because they were married. That, just needless death. Needless death here. So the point is, though, on lifeboat number 8 specifically, there was plenty of room for both Mr. and Mrs. Strouth, but they both died. We also learned from another woman who survived only because she was physically thrown into a lifeboat from the Encyclopedia Titanica. This has historic accounts of the Titanic. Only 20 women were near the boat and they were put in. My daughter Ruth was among the first, but I said I would not go if my husband did not accompany me. There was room for 14 more after the last woman had found her place, and they all pleaded to let the men take the empty seats. But the captain said he would not allow the men to take the empty seats. And so she says, I was frantic. There was that boat ready to be lowered into the water and only half full. Then the order came to lower. The men were pleading for permission to step in, and one came forward to take a place next to his wife. I heard a shot, and I am sure it was he that went down. So this man wanted to get into a half-full lifeboat with his wife, and he was physically shot and killed on the Titanic because there was empty seats and he wanted to live. Listen, folks, this is death by chivalry. All right, the account goes on. Then the boat swung out from the deck. I was still with my husband, and Ruth had already disappeared below deck. I gave a great cry. I remember perfectly calling out the name of my daughter, and 2 men tore me from my husband's side, lifted me one by the head and the other by the feet, and dropped me over the side of the deck into the lowering boat. So they physically throw her into the lifeboat, ripping her away from her husband. Mind you, this is a lifeboat that's not even full. Both of them could have got on the lifeboat. Says I was struck on the back of my head, but I had furs on, and the fact probably saved me from greater injury. She says, quote, the terrible thing was that we had so much room left for the poor men who were snatched away and left on the Titanic to freeze to death and drown. What a tragedy. It's death by chivalry with women and children first. So this is really death by chivalry. The focus of courtly love, romantic love here, practically costs many lives, not just of men, but of women and children as well on the Titanic. Now, we got to get rid of this. We got to get rid of this. And actually, if you watch the movie Titanic with Leonardo and Kate Winslet, if you watch that, at the end of it, there was a scene that, boy, you got to really think about, because there's a scene at the end where Kate Winslet's character, she takes the blue diamond, this huge diamond, and throws it into the water as a token of her love to the man who died chivalrously for her, even though she had married someone else and she had had children and blah, blah, blah. She never let go of the love that she had for this true love in Jack, who died for her on the Titanic. And she never even told any of her family about him until that point. She was alpha widowed. She was alpha widowed by Jack on the Titanic, dying for her in a chivalrous way. Well, we got to get it turned around. We got to get rid of this stuff. I don't want to see any more death by chivalry. All that said, Christ is winning. He is building his church, and the gates of hell will not prevail against it. Until next time, this is the Post Millennial Man.